do change. If you look at it historically, this region has been very deeply integrated. And before the Sikh route passed through this exact region, and there was all of the cross-fertilization that we've seen in sort of ideas, religion, trade, even diseases have been shared through the same route. So what we have right now is a bit of an anomaly. We have to, Dr. Navidal, address you first. We have this very positive sort of opportunity coming up, but at the same time we have to deal with this very real threat that businesses in Pakistan perceive. They feel that our state of competitiveness right now, our business environment is not at the level that they would feel that it's fair to open up. At the same time, we've dealt with premature deindustrialization after the FTA and opening trade with China. How do we sort of negotiate these two factors?
Thank you, Nazish, and good morning or good afternoon. First, let me thank you and Turab for inviting me to this, and an excellent report. Sanjay, can I call you Sanjay?
Please.
Wala. Because my best friend is called in Syamwala, so I think that is very common in our part of the world too. So hopefully that will be the future. And congratulations, the next one. Now I'm going to focus on India and Pakistan, because I think that maybe of great interest there, and I think as far as this report is concerned, it covers all the countries, but I think if there's any weakness, it's the coverage of India-Pakistan trade, which is not covered in that depth. Partly, of course, there isn't very much trade to speak of. But the gap that you pointed out, more than 3/4 of that gap is India-Pakistan trade. So really, that is the elephant in the room, and that is, I think, I would like to talk about. Also, something that you touched but didn't go into, that is that the problem between India and Pakistan trade is political rather than economic. And so we need to, as you say, address it in such a way that can overcome the political barriers to economic integration or development. And so this report begins to do that. It points out the cost of the political positions that we have taken, that huge opportunity that exists at the doorstep, and all of us, particularly Pakistan, is in the state where our exports have not been growing, and we need to really expand our export if we're ever going to come out of this top growth cycle which our balance of payment and crisis has got us into. So I think this is the beginning of that. It sets the stage that, look, this is a huge cost. But I would recommend, and I don't know if you would have the freedom, that to do a major comprehensive study on India-Pakistan trade, which actually looks at the cost and benefit and the losses and opportunities in this trade. You mentioned that trade between Dubai and Pakistan via Dubai is 3 times the formal trade, and also the potential that may exist, that 39 billion with South Asia, 35 with, or 33 with India. Where is it? I mean, since if we break it down, is it possible to break it down where the big wins might be? The other problem that I've always had, not with your report, but I've always had, is to talk about SAFTA. As your table, which you put up here, and is in there, table 01, shows that we are more restrictive in trade with each other than with the rest of the world. So it's not a question of preferential tariffs. We are not even having normal trade with each other. So I think that part of the problem lies, I think, putting the cart before the horse. I think before getting into SAFTA, we should have first talked about normalization of trade. And the point that you raise, clearly businesses if we put in the preferential tariffs on Indian imports, then the issue becomes much more difficult for businesses. But if it is a normal trade, then it may be less so of an issue. So I think that maybe a stepwise approach would be better rather than careful. The other thing is difference between agriculture and industry. There is huge what you call opposition to import of agriculture. There's organized, the Kisan lobby, etc. So I'm not going to talk about that. That is a separate issue. Personally, I think there's huge potential there, but I'm not. Just like you said, service is as big as maybe goods, but also I think agriculture is as big as, or more as industry. But again, very, very peculiar issues which I won't go into. So I think that we need to start with tackling the problem of trust. And the first step is this. The next step would be if you could say, look, Pakistan is losing 30 billion or 20 billion of exports by following this policy, which would mean that our total exports today are 24 billion, but in 5 years they could be double just with this process. But the other thing, the friend of mine who is economic advisor in India, he says, in India also you need to convince people that there is some benefit to them. For them, Pakistan is marginal. The economic benefit of opening up with Pakistan is not very large, and so why should we get Pakistan out of this hole? So we need to document what are the benefits to India of opening up trade with Pakistan. And these should be substantial to influence the Babus in Delhi and the politicians that, hey, we've got a big gains to be had if we do that. And obviously when the new government comes in, they have open slate and they may be more open to this kind of thing. So I think we need to tell them what are the losses potentially and the gains that we are suffering because of the thing. And then as you said, with a timeline, develop a program that over 5 years or 10 years, how to eliminate. Secondly, my way to approach would be, to addressing your question, the fears that the businesses have. This perception is based much more on hearsay and thinking than reality. But of course, there will be winners and losers. So the focus should be, I think, in terms of industry wise. When we open up, instead of doing general opening up of all the tariffs, etc., and everything, focus on one industry. Bring in both the stakeholders on both sides, work out what are the issues, develop a plan over the next 3 years, how we're going to liberalize it, and then proceed on that industry. Apparently in Latin America, in 2 particular countries, they did this on automobile industry, and they found that was one of the countries said, what would we export to the other country because we don't make cars. But ultimately what happened was they were exporting more parts than importing cars from Mexico, for example. So that's a famous example that the potential gains from trade may be you import cars from India, but you export parts and components for cars and automobiles to India, and that becomes the balance. So it's very important, though we should be looking at the balance between the world, but in fact there needs to be some balance between countries as well, particularly when you're coming with a critical deficit. So I would choose industry, again, which there is a win-win potential. Both countries can gain from it. Clearly, textiles is one. We are both major exporters of textiles, garments, and major producers. And if they could cooperate, Asian Development Bank did a small study and found there were huge gains to be had in South Asia if there was free flow of intermediate goods between these countries on garments, machinery and technical expertise from some of the countries into Pakistan and so on. So that's one. Automobiles is another one. Huge potential growth area, which we have a very large parts industry. You've done the study on this, based around Lahore and in this area, so huge potential there. So if we take an industry-wise approach, do our homework, then open up that industry in a phased manner and show the gains which occur as a result of that. What we begin to do is to put some runs on the board, as we say. And once you have one or two success stories, it becomes easier to go to the next one. And you begin to gain momentum, and ultimately you reach a tipping point at which nothing can stop you, because then it becomes so large, nobody in the right mind would want to will be able to stop it actually. So if you take a gradual approach, I think you also suggest that you take a gradual approach, but the gradual approach should be, instead of the 4 barriers you identified, starting first with the industry level analysis and then applying those 4 barriers to that industry and coming up with a plan how do we liberalize trade in that industry and putting your industry together. And then of course, once you've done that, then the whole new South Asia opens up. Once you're over the tipping point, as you say, I personally think this is an underestimate, as you said, it's not a dynamic estimate. We have seen, we often do this, maybe taking too much time, but we do this analysis that we export the same thing, we import the same thing, what kind of trade we will have with each other, the real preference theory kind of thing. That's silly, because if we export tomatoes and India exports tomatoes, our harvest periods don't align, then the huge potential for trading tomatoes or onions or what I'm taking agriculture example, but I'm just giving you those. That, for example, there may be a huge potential for exporting, for us to export to Punjab on that side. I know one example where they had this, I think, paper industry, and they wanted to import industrial raw materials for making paper, and they were cheaply available here from caustic soda, something like that. And we may import on certain side from Bombay and the industry to Pokhara. Same things can move across borders in large amounts, taking advantage of proximity, but that requires overland trade. If a trade is going to come by sea, then, as you mentioned, the actual cost, we looked at that, of taking something from Mumbai to the bay, unloading it there, repacking it there, bringing it to Karachi is actually greater than taking that thing from Mumbai and sending it to Brazil. It probably is. Because it's not the distance in these things that matters so much, but how many times the transshipment takes place, packing, etc. and so on and so forth. So, sea trade is not the answer, except maybe for Karachi. But otherwise, this land border is the critical. You've got a huge, maybe 1,000 miles or 1,000 kilometer long land border here, got over 1,500 kilometers on that side, then you've got with Iran. This example that you gave of ours is very, very interesting. We should try to convince the government to begin to open to that. You would have huge potential on Sindh. One of the poorest areas of Pakistan are in that belt. Both the desert areas, the very poor areas, but if they have this opportunity to trade, you may begin to create this thing, and they also have culturally and other similarities. So I think this hard side is very good, and if you can push it selectively, it could have huge potential for, because we have to both look at the regional benefits as well as the overall. So huge regional benefits are possible. Thank you.
And then actually, for the auto example, we did a very detailed report on regional competitiveness in the auto sector, and I think Sanjay also proposed in that report as well that you put regional value chains in which, or exactly this auto parts and vehicles example, this just simply doesn't make sense. The large volumes that are required, and India and China both giants, which are already the largest car makers in the world. Now, Turab, I plan to ask you about the report, and I still plan to ask you about the report because I know we took a much larger view of regional, not just regional trade, but also regional integration and connectivity and cover a lot more. But I'm wondering that, in response to Dr. Navid's comments, I know that you've been engaged in work on bilateral trade between India and Pakistan. It's a very detailed stakeholder analysis for specific industries as well. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. First, Sanjay, great book, great report. It covers almost all areas very well. And as Javed said, perhaps because Pakistan and India, they're not trading that much, so that information, and perhaps in a next report you can want to focus on it. But as Nazish just mentioned, we've been sort of working on Pakistan-India trade for a fairly long time, and it's also very frustrating. It's not just sort of academic or policy work, but there was also an engagement, as Sanjay mentioned, the SASM, South Asian Economic Student Meet, which started in 2004, and it's basically undergraduate School of Economics and LUMS, colleges and Delhi University. Almost all of South Asia now is included in it. So the conference used to be held in a different South Asian capital. And twice it's been at LUMS and the Lahore School. The last one was in 2012. And believe it or not, there were around 30 Indian students and faculty who came here. Through that network, we've also had faculty, Indian faculty, 4 Indian faculty members, Kathuria, Smita Kumar and others who've come and taught at LUMS. Now think about that happening now. It seems as if that was a completely different world. And that's the unfortunate reality of Pakistan-India relations. I apologize, Sanjay, I'll be again concentrating on Pakistan and India here. So it's the volatility of that and unpredictability of it. That a couple of years before, we were at the verge of some normalization of economic relations, and there was a lot of movement of people across the border also. But now we're in a position where getting visa is so difficult. So the work which Nazish is referring to, that was an older work, I'll come to that, but the more recent exercise which we did for Pakistan at 100 was trying to take the bull by the horns in some sense, try to look at actually what the problem is. And as Sanjay and Javed Saab mentioned, this problem seems to be a political problem. Economics does not trump politics, it's politics which always trumps economics when it comes to Pakistan and India. And perhaps the reason is that the stakes are so low. People, policy makers, do not keep into consideration the huge opportunity cost of block trade. They're not going to look at that, sadly, unfortunately. They're just going to look at what the existing level of engagement is. And that engagement hasn't gone beyond the formal engagement, $2 billion a year. So there aren't enough lobby groups, there aren't enough stakes on both sides of the border, which could push both the governments to actually revisit their stance in terms of economic and political peace. So the way we looked at it was that we, rather than not looking at politics, we also brought in politics in this paper which we wrote for Pakistan 100 with a colleague of ours, Moeed Yusuf, who will be joining LUMS soon. He's a political scientist and works on international relations issues also. And looked at ways by which you could have win-win situations which could influence the politics in both India and Pakistan towards perhaps a better relationship. So one is that if you allow things to happen, so on the trade front, if we had gone for MFN with India, there perhaps would have been a snowballing effect on the amount of trade between the two countries. And then the perceived cost of going back to the bad old days would have been very high. Okay, it could have gone up to 10 billion, 15 billion, $20 billion. Yes, in some number of years, but eventually we would have done. The point is that that would have created lobby groups or stakeholders on both sides of the border, which would then influence their governments of actually talking to each other also on other issues which are perhaps more thorny. So that was one. And not just trade in goods. If you look at, we also looked at trade in energy, and again a complete win-win situation. India has energy shortages. Pakistan links India and the rest of South Asia with an energy resource-rich Central Asia. So one example of that is TAPI, which is still in the works. So again, if you have that energy connectivity, that will create, within India, large constituencies which will then have an interest in relationship with Pakistan and also Pakistan's stability. Another avenue is water. Both India and Pakistan, South Asia is water scarce. Okay, we had an Indus Water Treaty back in 1960s, and there are sort of these disputes on water, these dams. This is again a win-win where both countries can meet, treat water as a common resource, okay, and again address this problem jointly. Environment is another issue. These are easy issues to tackle. I remember, I think it was last year or a couple of years back when you had the smog situation. This is the time when the two governments, I think Delhi and Punjab, were talking to each other, trying to come up with ways by which they could actually address this problem. And another aspect of it, which is very important, and we did a report on it, is tourism between these. So we focused on the potential of religious tourism. And you would all know now, given that Kartarpur has been now on media, that for the Sikh community in India and the diaspora Sikhs, and by the way, it's a very rich community. For them, Punjab, this part of Punjab is their Makkah and Medina. And if you open up the borders, you can earn billions of dollars and create lots of employment, okay, in this area, and also spillovers are going to be in other provinces and also KPK of just religious tourism. Now, what restricts that? With trade and other movements, you have a very strange, and this is because of politics, visa regime. I think no country has such visa regimes as Pakistan. If you get a visa to go to India, you get a city visa. Okay, in most instances, you have to go to the police station, register yourself, and same with Indians coming here. They're just allowed to go into particular cities. That's almost bizarre. Now, we came to a point, and that is when it becomes frustrating. We came to a point where we were almost sort of resolving these issues, and this was around 2011, 2012. During Musharraf's years and after that People's Party government, there was a concerted effort on the part of both governments to actually normalize immigration. So in Pakistan it started, we used to have a positive list. From positive we moved on to a negative list, and it was a reduction in items in the negative list. And we were close to, in 2012-13 I remember, giving India MFN. By the way, India gave Pakistan MFN back in 1996, so we had to reciprocate. So we were very close to that. And we did a study, senior economist Dr. Mohsin Khan, and we went around the country, did a very comprehensive stakeholder analysis, getting views of various sectors. Generally the view was positive, because businesses see an opportunity. And remember, we had signed an FTA with China in 2007. So they used to say that, listen, if we have been able to face China, we won't have a problem with India. In fact, we'll have a greater opportunity to market our goods, given market access in India, than perhaps in China, because of preference similarities. So there was a lot of, and as Javed Saab mentioned, when you look at these complementarities, these are static analysis. If you talk to businessmen, they have a dynamic view. They look at potential market, and they can look at potential products which could be sold into that market. Okay, so products which are not even around at the moment can emerge if you open trade. Okay, that's the dynamism of trade. And India is such a large market for us to do all of it, and that's a very silly position to be at anyway. Anyway, so we were very close to that. In the media, like in India, there's a particular way they look at both countries. So this all started that, oh my God, especially our Urdu channels, that Pakistan is going to give MFN to it. MFN, most of it, sabse pasandida ho, not realizing that just means that you're not discriminating negatively, you're treating it like any other country. So we had to change that to NDMA, okay, because MFN meant non-discriminatory market access. Sadly, in 2013, we thought that the new government would come and this, the Nawaz Sharif government would give MFN, but border clashes started, and everything went to the back burner, and things have gone from bad to worse. But we're positive. Okay, this government seems to be very positive about opening up trade. There's a big positive step, which is sort of the Kartarpur corridor, okay, which can initiate at least this religious tourism, which, as I said, has a lot of potential. I was just thinking, and perhaps we can discuss this, this is a brilliant idea, this Heart idea. This Kartarpur corridor, with this Heart idea, could be something which could be done. I mean, with all this commercial activity, with sort of the Sikhs coming in and the rest coming in across the border, you can have something similar in this corridor. So there is hope, and I think that post-election in India, perhaps things would be better. Okay. At the moment, we are interested in trade, but they don't want to do that, and we understand there's some domestic political compulsions and sadly perverse politics on both sides of the border, but post-election things might improve. I hope I've covered.
No, it's fine. Thank you so much, Turab. You're right, when you run the gravity models, when you were saying that the greatest similarities between Pakistan and India compared to Pakistan and China, they explicitly recognize that having a common language, having a common shared colonial heritage or common history, those are very, very important because they typically lead to a much greater value of predicted trade between two nations. Now, what is that you can respond to the panelists now? We can open the floor for questions.
I'd like to hear from you.
Yeah. To open the floor if you have any questions or comments. Keep them short, please, everyone.
It's too short.
Nadia. And Nadia has actually been working with us on trade, also the reach of the competitiveness one and the Pak India code you all working on it.
Yeah. First of all, congratulations, brilliant report. Haven't really had a chance to go through the whole thing, but it seems interesting, and we've worked on this a lot. Now, I think that Dr. Hamid and Turab mentioned something that was very interesting in the sense that so of course we know that the elephant in the room is India-Pakistan, right? And so currently the problem is that India doesn't really see the need to trade with Pakistan. So I mean that point that you were making, what's in it for India, right? And I think that the reason, for example, we know that India, China have strained relations, but they're able to disentangle that because India sees a benefit in doing so, right? So in a sense, well, the problem really is that what's in it for India, and I think that is going to be the key. Because if India sees value in trading with Pakistan, then it will have the incentive to eliminate all of these other hurdles and simplify things, right? And I just wanted to hear your take on that. What do you think about this?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Currently, of course, the round-tripping trade via Dubai, Singapore, and so on, it's much larger than formal trade, reported trade. So in that sense, India is already, exporting much more than the figures are telling you. I think the interest is what, both Navid Saab and Turab were saying, that actually potential exports of India are the gravity model because of language, common border, and so on, is about 19 to 20 billion versus currently 1.5 billion in the figures, right? So that is not a small amount, not a trivial amount to be scoffed at. And Pakistan is a very large country, and it's going to grow. So I can assure you that from when we released this book in India, for example, and the Commerce Minister had come, and he was very interested in exploring export possibilities and joint kind of value chain possibilities with countries, all countries in the region. And of course, the biggest prize for India in that sense is also Pakistan, like vice versa. I mean, for Pakistan, of course, the opportunity cost is much, much higher because of the total exports are so small. So if you add 24, 25 billion, if you add 18 billion, that's you're talking of a very different Pakistan in terms of BOP issues and all of that. Yeah. So I think convincing. So I think it is more in this case. I would go more with the thesis of Turab. So how do you get to that stage? I think you have to really convince the policymakers that if you let things go, politically, allow these trade forces to create their own level. And in some of this already happening to some extent, right? That trade via Dubai, you can't stop trade. If there is arbitrage possibilities, business community will take advantage, one way or the other. So, but this kind of informal trade or round-tripping trade is not benefiting the customs, right? It's not giving revenue, and to the extent that there is smuggling, that also doesn't help. because that you don't even know about the safety issues of those products. So I think there is I think a view propounded by many people in India that India is less interested in the region on regional integration because it's simply too large. And I think that view is very misplaced. Because the markets in South Asia is growing. Bangladesh, Pakistan are very large markets. But secondly, India is not one monolith. There are parts of India which desperately need, Northeast India desperately needs connectivity with Bangladesh in order to prosper. Otherwise, it will remain. It is really cut off. It's almost like an Afghanistan or a Nepal for the rest of the world. And so it needs that to prosper.
Yeah, so I think I find this sort of political perspective very interesting. One thought is it's around to mention that we talk to people and other stakeholders around the country. What do they think of this notion of election cycles at some level running the relation? So even if there was trade, like do you think it would actually get to a point that trade is so strong that 5 election cycles from now, this kind of a cycle won't matter, and that politicians would have to go hunting for other issues to get voters on. But that thing, like, what do they think of that uncertainty? Do they think that this kind of fluctuation sort of makes them nervous that even if yes there is market potential, but 5 years from now am I going to have to like stress all over again, and then 5 years again down the lane? I'm just curious to hear.
I think it's like you're stuck in a low-level equilibrium, and somehow you need a push to get out of it. It's a chicken and egg story, mostly because of the fact that it's so unpredictable. So nobody would like to invest or go for sort of something which has a market in India. And even if things open, they'll be very circumspect on given this unpredictability. But that's the thing, and I think it's. If you actually allow somehow, you push for normalization, and if the numbers grow, then I think on the political front, this is, again, a conjecture, that things might start to improve. Why? Because you have businesses on both sides, constituencies on both sides, which will then have stakes across in trade. And that might sort of push the governments to actually be careful in severing relations the way we do now. We literally stop talking to each other. So I think with economic normalization, you have political normalization also happening gradually. But yes, we're stuck in a low level equilibrium. We want some sort of a push to get to, and then the snowballing might start.
Any other questions from students, please?
You talk about vulnerable sectors. Agriculture has some largest and most definitely a vulnerable sector. So, but some of the safeguards for Pakistan could save Pakistan from the imports that is here.
Sure. So yeah, I'm glad you raised the issue of agriculture and Navid Sahab also. I think so. We know that one of the scuttling factors was the agricultural lobby of that 2012 possibilities that had emerged. I think, and then following that, the two sides were talking to each other very closely. They had developed proposals for how to do agricultural trade with each other, and there were just a few major commodities that were of concern. Especially in the cereal category. The others, fruits and vegetables, there was win-win trade on both sides. As Navid Sahab said, seasonality, right? So potatoes, tomatoes, and all of that stuff. There were seasonal issues which would actually make it win-win on both sides. And the other thing on agriculture we know is that nobody says that you have to include 100% of product lines in the first year of liberalization. Agriculture globally is always the stepchild of liberalization, right? It has been allowed to keep away from liberalization globally, whether it is Japan, whether it is the European Union, and even the US, right? They've all had restrictions in agriculture. So you can have a special agreement on agriculture alone. So, but at least if you build that small momentum on the manufacturing side, with safeguards, I think it is entirely possible. So I think the point there, from what I understand, was that there was not, agriculture lobby was not consulted, and so they got really, they were found themselves to be very vulnerable. But perhaps they said if we had been consulted beforehand, we could have been more positive. I think it's possible to design a scheme where you backload, and you can even, in the case of agriculture, you can even keep some sectors away from the liberalization schedule, the extremely sensitive sectors. Even ASEAN, which is, I think, liberalized 98% of its product line, each country is allowed about 1% of tariff lines or something, which are extreme sensitivity, which are not put on the table for liberalization. So I think it's entirely possible. The snowballing effect that Turab talked about, I think that can happen if we start.
I'll just add to Sanjay. Actually, this is very interesting because you have these agricultural lobbies, different association protest in 2012. Now, we were also engaged with the Farmers Association, Tariq Butcha, and Fark Devana, and I remember, so they went on a conference with us, and it was, I think, Ikria hosted it. So they had come to a point after that, and they were in talks with the organization in India and the government to actually come up with an arrangement, a special arrangement for agriculture. So there was a lot of headway in agriculture also. So not just seasonality, also looking at sort of shortages which happen. Okay, and during shortages you allow import of certain agricultural item, and you do it till prices go to a certain level, and then you put up a tariff, for example. So that sort of arrangement was done. Fark Devana is still around. He knows about that. So now these things were happening. Why? Because of these joint chamber of commerce activity which had started, and they had formed various sector committees. And I know in some other sectors also, a lot of these, the issue of NTBs came around. In cement, there was an NTB which required certification quality, Pakistan export of cement, quality certification from India. Now India allowed Pakistan laboratory certification, which then made exports to India of cement possible during that time. And it was only because the trading communities, through that institution of a joint chamber, and these committees were actually talking to each other and influencing their respective governments.
somehow overlook this problem, and if not, then even in the case of the recent PTI government, while we do see that they are open towards trade towards other countries, but then there's also clear involvement of religion in politics, and there's so it's not like it's not both the things are not together. They're two different sorts. So do you think that with all of this going on, with a growing religious extremism problem, and perhaps not much being done to curb it, there is still potential for India to be willing to treat this?
So I think that we already addressed this issue of just earlier. I just mentioned what could be benefits for India to trade with Pakistan. As I said, there's a again massive gap in India's potential exports to Pakistan and vice versa, and even more Pakistan's potential exports to India. And mind you, I should say that even common people think that exports is the welfare gain. Actually, it's imports which are the welfare gain. For countries, for the bottom line of trade is consumption. Consumption is through production or imports, not through exports. Exports are the means to get imports, foreign exchange and everything. Right? So, if you are importing from any country, then the only reason you're doing it is because it's the most efficient supplier of that product line, unless you have a huge trade diversion through preferences. But that's a separate point. Let's keep that aside. So, there are many products which Pakistan can supply to India, especially I think in agriculture lines, for example, cement, I think auto parts, surgical instruments, you know, there are sports goods, and then there are value chains possibilities in many of these sectors. So I think economically, I used to talk a lot to Mr. Gul Ahmed, right? So he used to tell me that when you used to do these exhibitions in India, Pragati Maidan in Delhi or in Mumbai at the exhibition center, it used to be a 3-day exhibition. First day they used to come, invariably his stock was sold out on the first day, no matter how much he planned, how much he overstocked, thinking that this should be enough because he had prior experience. Yet the products were selling out, right? So he had to ask for supplies, emergency supplies, to come home. And these are product lines where it also produced in India. So I think the point that you were making now is you can actually trade in the same products because they are differentiated. You love salwar kameez from India, Indian ladies love salwar kameez from Pakistan, right? So what you call your very wonderful cotton products are loved, So there are immense possibilities. So what I'm trying to say is that it is not only Indians. I mean, a true trade economist. If I was doing a selling job to India, I would not only harp on exports, I would also harp on competitive imports, which are currently being diverted to other countries because of the lack of normal trade relations with India. So I think it is possible, and I think in India is a strong culture of economic advisors in key ministries. So when the politics is right, hopefully they will play a role in convincing the political bosses. So I don't see religion as a particular issue here. I think it's all conflated. Religion, politics, or extremism. I think the point here is that as Turab was saying very, very nicely, is that can you create a situation where somehow through the small wins, through the product, sectoral processes, can you create enough of a critical mass of vested interests on both sides, vested interests in a positive sense, business people on both sides, that will make it much more difficult for you to go back. Right? So they will trump. If that happens, then hopefully they will trump lobbies, whether it is religious lobbies or extremist lobbies. That's the hope. I mean, as economists, that's what we can hope for. Obviously, our domain, we're not experts on the political side, but increasingly we are seeing globally trade and politics are so intertwined. So we have to become amateur political scientists as well.
The point is this, that behavioral economics tells us what you don't have, you don't miss. So if we are missing $20 billion of exports, we won't even pay any attention to it. But once you have it and it's taken away from you, then you miss it and you are fighting to keep it. So therefore, that's why I said that you need to start small and have tangible progress on the ground. And then, as Sanjay said, that you create people who have a vested interest with champions for trade, who want to preserve that. And they will fight much more than people who say, oh, I got 20 billion extra. There's nobody willing to make a stand on that issue. So that's what we need to do.
Maybe now, on that note, I think we'll wrap up because I know Sanjay has to be elsewhere at 2 for the podcast. Thank you so much, and I think there's some really nice, very implementable, very real and concrete things that come out of it, some baby steps that can be taken to help sort of demonstrate those gains, and I think that's the real selling point and contribution of the book. It's an excellent book. Thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thanks.